There have been 20 government shutdowns since the modern budget process was introduced in Congress. The longest shutdown lasted 35 days. That occurred in 2018 during President Donald Trump's first term in office. In the past, government shutdowns led to many federal workers being furloughed or temporarily put on leave. But the Trump administration could use the shutdown to continue firing and laying off workers, which could lead to a big impact on essential services right here in Connecticut, like Medicaid, food assistance, and even education. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Today, we'll learn what the government shutdown means for our state. And joining us now is Commissioner Andrea Barton-Reeves. She's the head of the Connecticut Department of Social Services. Thank you so much, Commissioner, for being on the show today.
Morning. Thank you for having me.
And also with us is Scott McLean. He is a professor of political science and faculty director of the honors program at Quinnipiac University. Appreciate your time, Scott, as well.
Good morning, Catherine.
And we have space for our listeners, as always. Let us know if you have any questions or stories or experiences that you like to share. 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So, Scott, I want to start with you today talking about the shutdown. This is not the first time we're seeing this, but I want to start with the basics here. What exactly is a government shutdown and what triggers it?
It's very simple. It's the government did not appropriate enough funds to make it through the end of this current fiscal year. So, at the end of the last fiscal year, right before June 1st, Congress did not pass all of the appropriations bill that needed to pass. We hit October, and there's not enough money to continue the government without something called a continuing resolution, which basically funds the government at the current level, just keeps things going until an appropriations bill is passed. So the Republicans, here's where we are, right? We are here now. The Republicans passed what is called a clean CR, which means that they attach no riders, no extra gimmicks, no nothing. Let's just keep the government going, and we'll continue to talk about what we haven't been able to fund. Democrats during the summer really experienced their lowest favorability ever in poll after poll. They also, from their own party, people who are Democrats were unhappy with the leadership of the Democratic Party in Congress. And Chuck Schumer, the Senate minority leader, last time there was almost a shutdown, went ahead and supported the CR. This time, no. The Democrats decided that they needed to fight and they needed an issue, and the issue was basically this. November 1st, the Affordable Care Act subsidies that had been operating through COVID and after COVID under the Biden American Recovery Act basically run out on November 1st. People's healthcare premiums who are on the ACA marketplace could go up as high as 50%. It could lead to 4.5 million people losing their insurance, making our numbers of uninsured go up, messing up our economy, unemployment. You know the drill. So the Democrats decide to fight this, and a long story short, the Republicans do not want to negotiate on this. They say, keep the government going or else. There's one more wrinkle to this, Catherine, because you've mentioned there have been shutdowns many, many times, right, and they've always been over something different. And typically the party that sort of offers a clean, continuing resolution, no strings attached, just want to keep the government going, usually gets the public's favor. The Republicans are counting on that to happen this time, especially when Democrats are not exactly beloved even by their own party base. This one's different because this time we have President Trump messing up the game plan for the House and Senate Republicans, sort of going on the attack, AI memes that are very insulting, racist, that we've got the president threatening to just go ahead and fire people beyond what even Elon Musk had tried to do, just firing, laying off federal workers, and also making it far more partisan than the House and Senate Republicans needed it to be, by talking about Democrat programs and targeting the cuts during this time on blue states. So Republicans may not turn out to be on top in this. It may mean that President Trump has turned the tide of public opinion against the Republicans and for the Democrats. And long story short, and sorry it was so long, but all the recent polls are showing that is exactly what is happening. There is a lot more support now for these subsidies than there were before, and people are favoring the Democrats' side in this and saying that the Republicans should give in. But let's face it, almost everyone blames both sides for this. But if there is an advantage, it's the Democrats.
Well, I mean, we appreciate a summary because just asked you to summarize all of the things into a quick 5 minutes. So that was very helpful
better
for
than I
us.
do in class.
Well, I mean, as we mentioned earlier, this is not the first time we are seeing a shutdown, but it does feel differently. And you had kind of summarized for us what is different this time. And Commissioner, we'd love your thoughts on this too, in terms of there are so many impacts here that we're seeing differently today, including the massive layoffs that we are already seeing prior to this and now continuing to witness it as it's happening. So how concerned are you, Commissioner, that essential services like Medicare, Medicaid, or even nutrition aid could get impacted by the shutdown?
Well, they will be impacted. And the challenge is that a person's party affiliation is completely irrelevant as it relates to their need for access to healthcare, access to food, and access to essential elements that all of us need in order to live well. So at this moment, and maybe what a lot of our listeners don't know is that the SNAP program, which is formerly known as food stamps, it's a supplementary nutrition assistance program, is at this moment 100% funded by the federal government, and the cost to administer the program is shared equally between states and the federal government. That will change sometime next year because of the passage of H.R. 1, but as we sit here today, that is still the case. So states, whether they're blue or red, are all facing the same dilemma. If there are no more resources after the end of October, and the shutdown goes beyond that, then every state will have to contend with how it will continue to fund its SNAP program absent any additional money from the federal government. My hope is, no matter how distant some may believe this to be in our current political climate, that there will be cooler heads that will prevail on both sides, because there isn't a state in this union that I can think of that would want to embrace the idea of tens of thousands of people going without access to nutrition, and many, many more people not having access to medical care because of stoppage in Medicaid funding. Every state will address this differently depending on their financial circumstance. Yep. But the policy is the same across the country, which is that this is the way that these programs are funded. This is the structure under which people receive really essential services in this state. And without those resources, we really are looking at some very difficult decisions that every state will have to make as to how they will continue to provide really essential supports for people that need it every single day.
Well, and Scott, we are talking about programs like food assistance programs, but of course there are other programs that will be impacted, and some we may not see immediate. But the longer the shutdown lasts, the more impact, of course, we will see it being left behind. So using food assistance as an example, but there are several other programs that we actually are seeing immediate impacts.
Well, as Andrea said, SNAP will probably make it to the end of the month. Women, infant, and children, it's a supplemental food, might only make it a couple of weeks. Andrea mentioned food share, other nonprofits, depending on federal grants. I think a bigger issue for Connecticut is what our state government will do to supplement those programs while the federal government is furloughed and shut down. We have a multi-billion-dollar reserve fund based on years of very, very good and careful spending in the state. We have the surplus resources to keep these programs going even longer, and they won't be sort of just thrown away dollars, some people may say. As soon as the federal government opens again, that money will come back to the state of Connecticut. So that we have a very comfortable cushion for a while, but it may only last 3-4 weeks.
When actually, Commissioner, building on that, speaking of sort of comfortable cushion or just something to fall back on for now, is we could see some nonprofits step up to fill in the gaps. And yesterday we heard that Connecticut Food Share authorized $1 million from its capital reserves to support this emergency response. Commissioner, curious to hear from your perspective, is this something that is sustainable? I can't imagine them being able to do that every year.
No, I wouldn't imagine that that's sustainable for any not-for-profit. Food Share happens to be in a very advantageous position to be able to do that. It's
Sure.
very uncommon for a not-for-profit really to have those kinds of resources to set aside.
Right.
But there may also be an opportunity for our philanthropic partners to figure out ways in which they could be supportive as well. It isn't necessarily that we're asking philanthropic partners to fill in the gap where the federal and state government would usually provide benefits. But if we think back to COVID, we did have a really strong partnership with our philanthropic partners that were able to step in because we were in a place of crisis and emergency. And if we do find ourselves in a similar place of crisis and emergency, meaning that the shutdown goes far longer than there may be resources available, then I think we would look to find ways that we could find more community support. And that might be through philanthropic dollars. And I will leave it up to the governor and the OPM and the legislature to decide how our rainy day fund will be used. I will not opine on that. But I do think there are creative ways in which we can find an opportunity to make sure that the residents of this state have the resources that they need. And when we talk about the ACA subsidies, I really, just to pivot a bit, I don't think that there's a real appreciation for how many people are covered by what we call our qualified health plans, or QHPs, and what effect this is going to be. So if you, for example, if you're paying $500-$600 a month for your premium, that can easily go up to $1,000, maybe even $1,200 or $1,500, depending on your personal financial circumstances, which would make healthcare unaffordable for people. And when healthcare is unaffordable, people either don't get care, or they only get care on an emergency basis. And care on an emergency basis is many multiples more expensive than receiving care on a preventative basis. So we're not speaking theoretically here. We are really speaking in terms of the reality of the immediate impact of this shutdown on people's lives. And that, I think, is what we all need to embrace and then be prepared to address.
Well, and then talking about reality here too, Scott, as we know, many Connecticut nonprofits do rely on federal funding, and these nonprofits have already been hit pretty hard by many of the federal funding cutbacks. So could the shutdown exacerbate that?
Oh, absolutely. It will push things to the breaking point if this continues on and on and on. I think it's interesting to look at the politics of this in one respect. That is, the Senate is dominated by a rule called the filibuster rule, and they can't really. That's the reason why we're at this impasse, is that the Republicans need 60 votes in order to fund the government. They don't have 60 members who will vote for the continuing resolution. So the pressure that will be brought to bear on those 5, 6, 7 Democrats who will be trying to, stick with their party, but also serve their constituents. As this goes on, that pressure will build. And I think when we get to talking about food support, nonprofits really do depend on the federal government. I've been working for a long time with a nonprofit called the Downtown Evening Soup Kitchen in New Haven. That's an organization that is doing fairly well and has a healthy federal grant to support it, but not every nonprofit is in that position.
Right.
Since COVID. We were really pushed to the breaking point during COVID, and not all of these programs and nonprofits have come through with the same amount of strength, and now we're being tested again.
When I want to pivot to a different area that has had a lot of pressure building is education. And joining us now is Kate Diaz, who's the president of the Connecticut Education Association and a Manchester High School math teacher. So, Kate, anything that jumped out to you that you've been listening to on how all of this might impact Connecticut students and teachers?
Well, I think what we've learned in the last few months is that all of this discourse, all of these pressures really cause the education systems to contract. They pull back. Have seen sort of reductions in hiring, pulling back of services, because when there's instability in the system basically goes into conservation mode. And so as we see pressures around school lunches and what is that going to mean for food insecurity, right? Like how are we going to be able to feed these children, which remember, like at the peak of COVID, we were providing 3 meals a day through school systems.
Right.
So now we're talking about pulling back to, okay, wait, are we even going to be able to provide lunch, right? Like, what are we going to actually be able to provide? And then we have to remember that schools also are centerpieces of a lot of resources. So Medicaid cuts are devastating in schools and in ways that people don't even understand. So a lot of our social work services can be Medicaid services, special education services come through those channels as well. So, we know we've seen the first line, which is before and after school programming, those kinds of things that we really do for community outreach, family supports, those kind of things have been eaten away at. But we're going to continue to see a diminishment of opportunities for our families. And that's really really disheartening because schools are such centerpieces. It's one of the few places that, we're mandated to be, right? Our families have to come and check into our schools. And so in that regard, there's an enormous opportunity for outreach and support that is funneled through school systems. And as we see these cutbacks and even the threats of cutbacks force our administration to think, okay, how are we going to survive? And while we have heard from the governor that they are willing, I was at an event last week and he talked about, willing to like tap in and figure out how do we supplement and how do we support to create, financial bridges. Really, the concern I have is that this shutdown is emblematic of things to come, right? We're not going to be able to make up for the loss of healthcare subsidies. We just can't. Once those are gone, they're gone. People are going to have to live with that. And that inevitably impacts our most vulnerable the largest way, right? All of the cuts we're talking about, our billionaires are not going to be impacted by, our millionaires are not going to be impacted by. The wealthiest groups of Connecticut residents will not even, they'll be inconvenienced, but they will not be dealing with sort of the life or death scenarios. But all of these things, when you talk about SNAP, when you talk about WIC, when you talk about healthcare subsidies, this is, do I have a roof over my head and food on the table, and am I able to take care of my family? Those are the people that I'm really, really worried about, who are already feeling like all of their safety nets, all of their support services are being threatened. We've seen children not able to come to school. Fear is becoming a factor in that. Access to support services. Like, we have a whole tension around the education system because it's the integration of all these things that I think is really, really challenging. And it's going to take its toll. We've got a lot of people hunkering down, looking for hope, steeling themselves with the joy of working with young people, recognizing that that is powerful work that we're doing. But all of these sort of external threats are going to take a toll. And I think the sooner we can stabilize our systems, the sooner we can build confidence that we're all going to be in this together and we've got each other's back, I think the better off everyone will be. But the federal government at the moment is really in turmoil. And it's sort of like the battle for the conscience of, sort of federal funding, right? What do we believe federal funding should go for? And I think it's tense and it's difficult.
Well,
and these are our growing pains as a democracy.
Right. And unfortunately, a lot of the things that you mentioned, including school lunches, Medicaid, and a lot of the sort of services that families and students rely on, these are a lot of short and long-term impacts to school systems that we've talked about throughout different conversations over the last couple of years. And sounds like the shutdown exacerbates what what issues those programs are already facing. And I think there's one area that we haven't really talked about a lot, really, is the education department has also ceased new grant making activities. So if the shutdown continues, how could this impact schools that rely on these grants? And what kinds of grants are we talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm really nervous about that process because a lot of the grants that school districts receive are often related to innovations, right? Like, how are we going to continue to evolve our systems so that they better serve the population of students? So when we talk about innovation, it could be things like how are we going to manage AI in our school systems, right? The entire grants for training educators are gone. They've just been eliminated. They're completely gone. Those are things that talk about how are we making sure that we're meeting the needs of the diverse needs of all of our children, right? So how are we investing in that workforce to do the work we need so we have the children prepared for the future, right? Like these are all interconnected things. So we've completely eliminated those. The next on the chopping block, I suspect, will be all of the supports for our children who don't speak English, right? Our immigrant students. Those are absolutely, they are being diminished and by the day. Those are frequently what we're seeing, the government, when they threaten to not release funds, those are resources that are always targeted. I would not be surprised to see those completely eliminated. And when we talk about that, we're talking about cutting into the richness of our education system, how we're really bringing what is arguably one of the most successful group of students that we bring into our school system is our immigrant population. I can tell you that I have, as a teacher, I always knew that if I had a person who was new to this country, it was amazing what these children were capable of with the supports we were provided, and just such incredible amount of flourishing. And to see that be under attack is just so un-American to me. It just like hurts my heart. But those are absolutely the things that are on the chopping block. And then we're going to go for the poor kids. Quite frankly, those are the next layer of grants. What do we do to support children who are born into poverty? We're not going to do that anymore. And so we're really, we're starting to go into what are the ways that we support children who are not born into the best of circumstances to give them the opportunity to thrive. And those are the things that are 100% mental health services, any of these kinds of things that allow us to provide additional academic support, interventions, and tutoring. So, in some regard, when we talk about the longevity of these cups, some that are not going to hit, by the way, intentionally until after next year's elections, right? Like there's a strategy involved in this that we're delaying some of those until after the election. But make no mistake, we are really trying to ensure that if you need help, that the federal government will not be there to provide it.
Well, and Commissioner, I see you nodding here real quickly. We have a couple of minutes before we need to go to a break, but because a lot of your services sort of coincide with the services that's provided in the educational space, any thoughts you want to react to with what Kate just shared?
Yes, I think that the point that Kate is raising about the cascading deleterious effect of the shutdown and all of these cuts on families is often not lifted up. And and I'm glad that she did, that took the opportunity to really underscore that. When parents lose health care, when parents cannot feed their children, when parents have housing insecurity, the most vulnerable population that pays for that are children. And if we as a society are saying to ourselves that our children are the most important, that we need to invest in them and that it's important for them to receive exceptional educations regardless of their zip code and that their potential is met, then what we're seeing now really is the antithesis of what we've been articulating is our vision for young people and for children in this nation. But the preservation of the family is really what's critical here. And no matter how we define family, there are people who are raising younger people who need support in order to be able to do that well. And that support is fundamentally found in having access to healthcare, good jobs, good housing, and great education. So this is why this shutdown is really so incredibly, I would say, threatening to all that we want to do as a nation and as a state. So I'm really hoping that at some point that the effect that this has on the nation and on our state will be felt by both sides, and they can come to the table and bring sanity back to this process so that we can start doing what's right for everybody, regardless of what side of the aisle they sit on.
Well, got some final thoughts, Scott, here for you. Got about 30 seconds here. We covered a lot in this short
Yes, we
period of time.
have.
But what are you looking for next?
Well, I think what we're really sort of trapped in is thinking about the next moment. What's the current crisis? How do we feed people? How do we clothe people, get them hot lunches, and so on? There's a deeper structural problem that underlies all of this, which is the Affordable Care Act. Marketplace subsidies were put into place during COVID as a temporary solution to skyrocketing premium costs. And it was thought that this would just be temporary and we would go on. It looks more and more like it's a permanent part of what would have to be healthcare in this country for the uninsured. The premiums went up in response to the government subsidizing things. So finding some ways for insurance companies, and they're making record profits in the healthcare insurance industry. So having that particular problem dealt with, and deciding whether we are going to permanently subsidize the healthcare marketplace, or are we going to try to find some ways to rein in health insurance premiums? And that's the deeper, longer-term problem. Otherwise, we're just going to keep coming back to this problem over and over again.
Well, this is certainly something that we're going to be keeping our eyes on. Thank you so much for joining us today. You've been listening to Scott Milling, who's the professor of political science at Quinnipiac University. Scott, appreciate your time.
Thank you.
You're also listening to Andrea Barton-Reeves, who's the commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Social Services. Commissioner, appreciate your time as well.
Thank you so much.
And also Kate Diaz, president of the Connecticut Education Association. Kate, always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And coming up, we'll talk about what it means to be Christian in America, that it's changing. We hear from two faith leaders and learn how the political climate is impacting parishes in Connecticut and across the country. You can join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Since being murdered at a college event in Utah, Charlie Kirk has been called a martyr. Several Christian leaders have applauded his commitment to his evangelical faith. Others have been more critical of his legacy. The late conservative activist was known for opposition to DEI initiatives and LGBTQ plus rights. He was a vocal critic of the Civil Rights Act. What does it mean to be Christian in America today? More than 60% of Americans identify as being Christian. That's according to the Pew Research Center. Here in Connecticut, how are parishes being influenced by politics? Joining us now to talk about it is Pastor Sean Fisher. He's head of the Bloomfield Congregational Church. Thank you so much, Pastor Sean, for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Catherine. Appreciate it.
And also joining us is Reverend Dr. Stephen G. Ray Jr. He's the minister of the United Church on the Green in New Haven. Welcome back to the show, Reverend.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
And so, Reverend Ray, I want to kick you off, or help us kick off this conversation with you here. Could you tell us what the past year has been like for you and your parish?
The past year has been, at my church, one of feeling and seeing how it is that the Christian faith is being used in ways that are actually bringing hurt and harm to very many of the people who are in our community. Being located on the New Haven Green, we're surrounded by people all day, every day, who are economically challenged, who are food insecure and whatnot. So what this has been, and what my job has been to interpret the Christian faith in a context in which the Christian faith is being talked about in a way that is actually bringing substantial harm to the least among us. And so that's been the biggest challenge, to begin to and to continue the work of articulating a Christian faith that is generative and actually cares about people.
So how do you parse that for yourself while at the same time trying to unpack it for your parishioners?
Well, I mean, for myself, recall I was a graduate school professor for a very long time. And so I taught about the Christian faith. And it's always been an open question in our nation whether or not the Christian faith was on the side of those who would have a limited view of what it meant to be an American citizen and what it meant to have a claim on the goods of our society. So for me, we're living in one of the fever pitch moments. And so I draw on our history, the civil rights movement, of the period leading up to the Civil War with the abolitionists, because it's always been the case that we have been divided along the lines of race and economics. And the Christian faith has unfortunately been the accelerant for very much of the division within our nation. And so what my challenge is to articulate a way of the faith that it's not being an accelerant for the sort of division in our society, but at the same time continues to hold up a vision of hope and inclusion, particularly for the least of those within our society.
Well, and so as you're articulating that, how are you meeting this political moment while responding to what's going on in the world right now?
Well, I do it through my preaching and through my teaching, and very specifically talking about how to understand the Christian faith that has political implications. So to care about the poor has political implications. To care about the weak has political implications, but that doesn't mean we become partisans so that we make it impossible for us to work with anyone who doesn't hold our particular view of Christianity or who doesn't hold our particular view. So that's how I've been helping and I've been working with myself, is that recognizing that our commitments have political implications, but that doesn't mean that you become a stark partisan that believes it is impossible then for you to find any common ground with anyone who is not, quote unquote, in your camp.
And Pastor Sean, I'm curious to hear what your response is to what Reverend Ray just shared, and what are things looking like at your church?
One of the core principles of Bloomfield Congregational Church, and for me personally, is that I'm not just the pastor of our church. We're not just a church for ourselves. We're a church for the community. And so when we're looking not just the felt needs of the people in the congregation, but the community, and serving people who will never walk through the doors of our church because they're looking to churches to see what we stand for, to see how we're going to make a difference in the community. When we do that, what I see both in the community of faith and the wider community is fear. And I think that is one of the things that we share in common, whether it's the religious right or it's the progressive left or is the center, that there's fear throughout America right now, and fear in our communities, fear in individuals' lives. And so I think part of our job now is to provide hope in a time where a lot of people are seeing one thing after another every day, every hour, that makes people crazy, and trying to find a way to help people have hope, to help people calm down a little bit, and to say there is something that we can do in this world to make a difference, and that there is good in this world. And right now, a lot of people are struggling to see that and struggling to see that hope. And so we're working very hard to provide that hope, to do that good, to do that work. We are actually, though, to respond to the moment, when you're talking about the political moment, we are very active, in that we are organizing political activities. We are organizing resistance movements. We are working to provide channels for people who believe that what's going on at the national level is dangerous, is wrong, and not based on saying someone is right or wrong from a religious perspective, but saying something is right or wrong for this country, and making sure we are putting our principles into action.
And what are you hearing from your community in terms of what are they fearing in the moment? And when you do hear what they're afraid of, how do you help them, feel that support, feel that love, whether it's from yourself or from the community or from whoever they're surrounded by?
I think one of the things that we experience now as opposed to 50 years ago, 100 years ago, is just the pace of information and the pace of things, and the ability for someone to influence the emotions of an individual on an hour-by-hour basis. I mean, you're already triggered. It doesn't take a lot to get someone back to that triggered state. So we're doing what we can to show people, look, what you're seeing and what's being manipulated in the media and the information that is being distorted, whether it's in our cities and people making up that there are these dangerous things going on in the cities and then sending militias, in, or sending the National Guard in, or whatever kind of preposterous actions are, going on, trying to bring facts and truth through the lens of a loving God and a living Jesus and the Holy Spirit, to say, look, there is a grounding, there is a foundation that we can look to beyond this exact moment. And when we turn and look to the scriptures, we can say, this isn't the first time humanity's been through something like this. This isn't even the worst time that we have seen. And while that might be discouraging to say, look, these documents that are 2,000, 5,000 years old are still happening today, right. The fact is that it can provide hope that we've been through this and we can get through this and get to the other side if we organize and work together for a better world.
Well, I think you raised such an important point in terms of everyone is being flooded by a lot of information at once. Mm-hmm. And both yourself and Reverend Ray have talked about how do you parse all of that and how do you unpack it together, mm-hmm. right? And with that, too, it's been 4 weeks since the murder of Charlie Kirk, and he was a pretty divisive figure. And because of his conservative message appealed to millions of Americans after his death, some Christians are lauding him as a martyr despite his divisive views on race, gun control, and other religions. So, there's a lot here going on. How are you seeing Kirk's death impact your parish and Christian parishes around the country?
It was definitely a turning point. And I'm not sure what was so specific about this moment in that, but I think the religious right also saw this as an opportunity to kind of take some moments where they were being divided and saying we can unify around this moment, and made up statements that they were saying people who opposed Charlie Kirk's views were saying when in fact they weren't, just created their own straw man and then began to knock it down to create this moment. What I feel bad about with Charlie Kirk, first, I'm horrified by his shooting. There's nothing positive about it. The world's not better without him in it. There's nothing positive that has come out of that, whatsoever. However, that being said, I think bringing attention to some of the ways that religion is being abused, the way religion is being used to hurt the very people that Jesus taught us to help and to protect, is incredibly disturbing. And for us to be able to do something and have an example of someone who is doing the opposite of what Jesus taught us to do and has turned a faith and a platform into that is frightening.
And Reverend Ray, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, in terms of, we've seen different reactions to Charlie Kirk's murder. It's either very divisive or very unifying, depends on the community that you're in. What are you seeing, or what are you thinking, Reverend Ray?
Well, a couple of things. One is that I very specifically in my church on Sunday after the killing, and also on my Facebook feed where I do a lot of work, didn't take any notice of it at all. And the reason why is because there's a significant sort of way in which he is no different than George Wallace was. He was no different than Bull Connor was. He was no different than James McCarthy, Senator McCarthy was. Is that there is this long history of people who have used the Christian faith as a companion to their sort of political agenda of ensuring that our nation is not a place where everyone is able to lay claim to the goods of our society, that there are the white people and then there's just everybody else. And so there is a way in which, and I guess what I'm trying to say is this, not ignoring the political impact, but it's contextualizing it in such a way so that people will once again understand that these forces have always been with us. They inflamed our nation to the point that we have a civil war. They inflamed our nation to the point that we had 90 years of segregation, that they are always here. They just have different faces. So our challenge is, in our time, how is it that we show a Christian gospel that stands against that. And there's a significant sort of way that and from my perspective, if I engage the sort of beatification, which is the Christian way of talking about making someone a saint, if I engage it either positively or negatively, I'm actually giving legitimacy to the process itself. And so, in terms of my church and in terms of very many of the circles that I was running in, certainly people regret the presence of political violence that led to that. But by the same token, we're not going to engage as if something new and unique has happened, as if something that is irrevocable has happened, because this has happened in our past. The question is, how do we build on the other side of it?
So we have to go to a quick break right now, but I want to come back to what Reverend Ray was just sharing and Pastor Sean with you yourself as well. Today we're talking about what it means to be a Christian in a time of extreme political polarization. With us is Reverend Dr. Stephen G. Ray Jr., who's the minister of United Church on the Green in New Haven, and also Pastor Sean Fisher, who is with the Bloomfield Congregational Church. Let us know if you have any questions or any stories that you would like to share with us, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live.
He's wonderful. Oh, yes, he is. He's really been.
This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Christianity in America is at a crossroads. Today we're hearing from two Connecticut church leaders on how the current political climate is influencing faith communities locally and across the U.S. So I want to come back straight to Pastor Sean. You were listening to what Reverend Ray was sharing in terms of there's a lot of paralleling going on historically. And you mentioned earlier too as well that this is not the first time that we're seeing this sort of divisiveness, but it could be a little different just because many of us are getting a lot of information at once. So as you find yourself in this space, we're seeing so much violence and news constantly. But throughout all of this, there are some bright spots. There is some joy. So what does that look like for you and the work that you're doing in your parish?
There are a number of things. Thank you for asking that question. There are a number of wonderful things, going on. For example, at Bloomfield Congregational Church, just this past Sunday, we had the second of 3 sessions of interfaith dialogues. We had Hinduism, we had Sikhism, we had Judaism being represented. The week before, we had 3 different religious traditions. 2 weeks from now, we'll have 3 more religious traditions coming in to have these conversations because we just believe the more that we talk, the more that we understand each other, the less we will hurt each other. And I think one of the threads that comes through history is that religion is bad when it breaks people. Religion is good when it breaks chains. And so the more that we can do to give the joy by showing how we are breaking those chains is important. Whether it is, last year we served, 70,000 meals in the greater Bloomfield community to people in need. These kind of things we also make sure people know about, not to advertise for the church, but we believe that people need to see these sustained commitments to helping the marginalized. The growth for a faith, the growth for an individual comes at the edge. The growing edge, Howard Thurman used the term the growing edge, and how do we continue to be on the growing edge of faith to show people what is possible when you follow a loving God, when you follow a loving person who says, you know what, you don't have all the answers. And I think that's what's dangerous when faith gets to the point, when Christianity gets to the point that says, we know exactly what the answers are and we are going to implement them and impose them on other people. That is dangerous. When we come out and say, look, we don't know exactly what the final answer is. We have a perspective. We think this is better for your life. We think this is better for how you can organize your life, and we can organize the community for hope and for good. I think that's a positive thing.
Well, and then Reverend Ray, building on what you were saying earlier too, as we left the segment talking about the paralleling in history, what are you hearing from your parishioners right now? When you're one-on-one with people, are they expressing confusion on what it means to be Christian today?
Well, I think that one of the things in my congregation, and this is what was particularly hard work over the last 9 months or so, is that my church has been one that's always been very socially engaged. I mean, we were a part of, an integral part of the Amistad affair. In fact, it was one of our deacons in our church who was a leader, Simeon Jocelyn of the Amistad, and it goes throughout history. So for us, many of the people who were in their 60s and 70s had spent their entire lives working for justice, and they felt that their life's work was going up in smoke. So it was a matter of helping them to understand and see that the gift of giving hope to the future is actually one of the most radical things that you can do in the context of oppression and in the context of growing authoritarianism. So for us, what my people were seeing, and what I'm hoping that they're continuing to see and gaining courage, is the very act of passing along the hope for the future in a time that would extinguish it. And if I could just make one comment about the importance of interfaith work. Mm-hmm. So we are deeply engaged with Connect, which is a religious community organizing group that does significant work in Connecticut. Because for us, it's not so much that we are invested in interfaith understanding as much as we are in interfaith working. So working with partners to build a vision, because for me personally, what the challenge is to build a vision where you can't imagine a world without having interfaith partners, without having ecumenical partners. Because at the end of the day, the narrow view of white Christian nationalism is you want to erase everybody else. So the remedy for that is to create a consciousness where people can't imagine what a different world looks like without all of these people with you.
Well, I still have so many questions that I want to share with you all, but running out of time. But we've got about a minute here, but really following what Reverend Ray was talking about, Pastor Sean, in terms of keeping that hope alive. There's a bright spot, as you had mentioned earlier, too. But how do you do that for yourself, when you're trying to do that for your community?
There's so many beautiful things in this world. There's so many beautiful people. And when we go out and serve in the community, I really believe in that saying that you can see Jesus, you can see God in other people's eyes, and see that most clearly in people who are hurting and helping them heal. So where I get that from my family, I get that from my son, I get that from my wife, I get that from the work that they do and the joy they bring to the world. I get that from our dogs, I get that from, wherever there is a beautiful sunset. I don't see sunrises. I don't get up that early, but I hear they're lovely too. But there are just so many wonderful things and wonderful people, like my colleague here. And that gives me hope when I see so many other people doing beautiful things.
Well, Reverend Ray, 30 seconds here. What gives you hope today?
Looking back at the history of the saints through time. So if we could withstand fire hoses and dogs, if we could withstand prison, if we could withstand internment camps, if we could withstand all of that and keep the spark of hope alive, then how much more so in our time can't we do the same?
Amen.
Well, thank you so much to both of you for sharing your stories with us. Clearly, this is something that we want to follow up at some point in the future. You've been listening to Reverend Dr. Stephen G. Ray Jr., who's the minister of United Church on the Green in New Haven. Thank you so much, Reverend Ray, for joining us.
Thank you.
And also Pastor Sean Fisher, who's with Bloomfield Congregational Church. Pastor Sean, appreciate your time as well.
Thank you for the opportunity, Catherine.
I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Tess Terrible. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And thank you all so much for listening.